begin. Okay, that's begun. So today's session is all about uncovering hidden diamonds. What do we mean by this? Usually when people think about their careers, they fall into two categories. The first one is you've got people who are attracted by the more traditional paths of well-known professions like law, accountancy, and medicine, which offer security and stability, and no doubt the adulation of proud parents keen to show off to all their friends. The other, on the other end of the spectrum, are those thinking of taking the riskier paths by becoming tech startups, chasing the significant returns of IPOs and buyouts. There are, of course, so many other roles in so many other industries where successful Black people are applying their trade and achieving some amazing things in the process. This is what's meant through employee networks. So without much further ado, the conversation and discover more. So let's start by talking to Shera, who's on mute at the moment. And Shera, can you tell us more about who you are, that you currently hold at the moment, and maybe a bit about the journey getting to that position?
Absolutely. Capital Partners. That is a sort of sales business development role, supporting clients across the globe, managing their carbon footprint and environmental goals. Before then, because that's certainly not where the journey began, it goes way back to Ghana, but I will shorten it so Colin and Charles have a mode to also share. Before then, I was very much started off in the third sector, working with charities like the Alzheimer's Society, British Red Cross, Womankind Worldwide, you name it. That's where my politics international degrees led me to. But after that, after about 4 years, I made the natural switch and transition into the private sector, where I spent 4 years at Thomson Reuters in our corporate responsibility and inclusion team. And I'm sure we'll get into this a lot more, but that's where the connection with the Black employee networks and the broader employee network journey began.
Wonderful, thanks for sharing, and I look forward to hearing more about the employee networks. And Colin, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, in fact. Hi, Dom, hi, everyone. I'm Colin. I am in the Royal Air Force. I'm a flight lieutenant, and my branch is the logistics branch. And basically, I have been with the Air Force for about 6 years now. And I currently work in current operations. So anything that's happening within the UK or outside the UK comes through my office. I have an extensive team and we all work together to make sure that we are on top of things, let's put it that way. And so, yeah, looking forward to the chat. I'm sure there's going to be more to come. I'll just clip my mouth for now. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks for sharing. And last but not least, Charles, please tell us a bit more about who you are and your journey.
Good evening, Dom. Good evening, everyone. Once again, I'd like to reiterate what the two other speakers have said, which is it's great to be here. So I'm Charles, also in the Royal Air Force. I'm currently based out of Oxford, at Royal Air Force Brize Norton, which is essentially our delivery hub to operations around the world. So by operations, usually people think, obviously, the pointy edge, which is more war. However, we deal with humanitarian crises as well. I'm a logistician by branch. Essentially have different branches in our organization. And I'm literally to my new role, which is very interesting. We'll talk about that a bit later. So
Thank you for sharing that. Your connection, I don't know if it's for everybody else too, but I was just struggling a little bit to hear you. It might work better if you turn your camera off. Let's try it. So first question, I'm keen to understand how you all know each other. Is it just me? Because Colin and Charles seem to look a bit similar.
Well, yeah, it's kind of my carbon copy, isn't he? Yeah, so Charles is my twin brother, and we both joined the Air Force at the same time. Now, if any of you didn't hear Charles, yes, it's because currently where he is, there's some sort of Wi-Fi connection issues, but I can always talk to what he said. He's basically in Oxford working in our delivery hub for operations in and around the world. And what Charles and I do tends to kind of work with each other. So I'm in High Wycombe in our headquarters, and most of the stuff that is decided in headquarters is what Charles delivers on the other side. So in that we're symbiotic in terms of we look the same, but we also kind of have the same jobs but doing different things.
Sure. So going back to the point you mentioned about you both joined the RAF at the same time, it kind of gives the impression both of you just kind of woke up one day and said, this is what we need to do. Or who was the catalyst? Who started the thought process?
Well, in fact, Charles and I joined the Air Force serendipitously, to be fair. About 7, 8 odd years ago, we took our niece and nephew to the RF Museum. And it's just by chance I just got enthralled by what I saw at the museum in Hendon. Now, at the time, Charles and I were actually running our own business, and so never really put a thought to it other than, oh, wow, this was a nice day out with my niece and nephew. But then further on, we just thought, interesting. Our backgrounds are in international relations as well. And because we read that, we were really intrigued by history and what the Air Force has done, in other words, to protect the nation. So we thought, interesting. We could travel. So by just digging, really,
Yeah.
we just found where we were good. We knew we loved business. Logistics is similar to business. And we just put the whole thing together and we started running since then. We joined, and before you know it, we're standing on the graduation ground with our swords. I was like, whoa, what's this? That was a flash moment, but yeah.
And was there any skepticism from your friends and family about joining? Because if there's one thing I remember from my childhood, it's my grandma telling me over and over again, don't join the army. And I think she kind of meant everything, but she would just say, don't join the army. So how did your friend, your peers feel? And then how did your parents and grandparents feel? And that's an open question to both of you.
Charlie, see if you can take that one.
Sure. No, they were super excited, actually. They encouraged us and they knew. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you well. Yeah, that's good.
Brilliant. Yeah, they were super excited, actually. They tend to think we make good decisions. I think that's the key thing to being a leader, isn't it? Leading your community, lead outside as well. So they knew we pretty much had a sketch. It was more of an open conversation between myself and Colin. And yeah, it was an exciting ride. But no, absolutely, everyone was in very supportive of our decision.
And then sort of as a practical step then, if someone wakes up one day and says, I think this is the right path for me, where would you go? Who would you phone? What would you do?
It's a brilliant question. So simply we have what we call an AFCO, which is our Armed Forces Careers Office. We tend to be nationwide. So we popped into London at the time and just asked them what roles they had. They'll ask you what qualifications you have, and then essentially they stream you based on what you say to them. And so afterwards, we had an interview. We had almost like an open day. And then pretty much just said, well, with your qualifications, etc., you could be an officer in this, or you could be in the ranks in this. So essentially, the journey was go to an AFCO, go for a presentation, go for an interview, and then go over to our college at Cranwell, which deals with officers. So that's essentially the step.
Sure.
Yes. Once you graduate, Cranwell, you then go.
So you came in at a high level. If I'm understanding it, please correct me if I'm wrong. Is it in the army? Do you have sort of Sandringham, and then in the RAF you've got Cranwell?
So you have Sandhurst. That's the army. You have Royal Air Force.
Sandhurst. Yeah.
Yes, the Royal Air Force has Cranwell, which is our college in Lincolnshire, Grantham. Essentially, you have two. Should I say you have two wrongs? So you can either go through Halton, which deals with all our junior recruits. So essentially, our people who will later become our sergeants, corporals of the future, our warrant officers. Then you have the leaders of the organization. Even though I say the corporals and sergeants are leaders as well on the ground. you also have the leaders of the organizations, which are the officers. First rank usually is from pilot officer, flying officer, flight lieutenant, which is our rank currently, equivalent to a captain in the army. And then you go on to squadron leader, wing commander, and then so on and so forth. So both trained at two different establishments to pretty much deliver the effect. So yes.
I see. So both of you are coming in at a high level, which gives you the prospects to then.
So, it's pretty interesting in terms.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting in terms of our story, not to take away from Cher, obviously, but our story was more, we were too old for a branch at the time. Okay. So the cutoff point was 29 years old. We were 30. So we went to commission, but essentially had to go through Halton first. And so we went through Halton. We did that for about a year and a half, and then we commissioned internally. And so essentially, for those who don't know I would say the position also is essentially just saying, if you've proven yourself that you can lead men and women. And so essentially you go in, you have your same interviews, and then you carry on internally to now manage and lead our people.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And Shera, I heard a podcast this morning, and the lady on there made this really interesting point that she currently has a role now today that she didn't even know existed when she finished formal education. And when I was looking at your role, I was thinking, I've never heard of this before. And I just wondered if you had heard of it 10 years ago or longer.
Absolutely not. And I think when I look at sort of the journey, at first glance, it just goes, wait, what? And I mean, my mum still struggles to understand what I do. But I think the key points to take away are, regardless of what you do what you love, and it will sort of map out that canvas piece and paint a full picture. So I started in the third sector because I was passionate about what I now know to be sustainability, which didn't really exist formally as it does now. Everybody's talking about it, net zero targets, the environment, etc. But back then I didn't.
So when you say back then, how far back are you going?
After uni.
Okay.
So about, I'm my age now, but about sort of 12 years ago.
Okay.
12 years ago, but also because I was born and raised in Ghana. So I always knew what I had to do, or what I wanted to do had to be connected to what is now also known as sustainable development. How do we benefit the communities within which we live in? And also, how do I make sure that I can support back home?
Sure. So if we just peel that back, so at the moment, you're the client engagement manager at Natural Capital Partners, but your first few roles were very different. Is that right? So just take us through that journey, please, because it's fascinating for people to see that what you do isn't necessarily who you are. And as you've just said perfectly, your career can go on a journey and unfold in ways you haven't imagined.
Absolutely. And I mean, formally, you can say what I do now is sales. Had you told me I'd do that after uni, I would have said, no way, I'm not one of those people. But actually, I absolutely love it. So it starts off after uni, figuring out what I wanted to do. As many of us with degrees studying politics and international relations, the myopic view at that point was to go into the UN. But challenges with funding for my master's meant I had to take a gap year, and I worked with a Finnish organization, which was supporting the empowerment of African women in Nigeria. So I got to do a lot of work on the ground in Nigeria with this charity, working on land rights for women, etc. And then another string of, I mentioned earlier, some other charity organizations. But what that experience taught me was the harder end of charities, where you aren't able to deliver on some promises because you don't get the funding.
Yes.
So the obviously natural switch is to look at other opportunities, and I found an opportunity in retail banking, working with a Ghanaian bank at the time that was setting up in the UK. So brand new launch, which meant that I was launched into fully working with the management team and learning on the job. the ins and outs of retail banking. It was 2 years at this bank that I then pick up the private sector experience, the customer services, but also learn more about the world of corporate social responsibility. I didn't really know it back then when I was in the third sector. I just thought I had to be fixed into charities. So here I am finding out about, we can deliver a lot with.
And was there just an attraction towards it, or did someone really pitch it to you? Maybe it's a bit of both.
Yeah, no, it was a general attraction because we had, breast cancer drives or International Women's Day and in the bank. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll put my hand up for everything. And then an opportunity 2 years later came up with Thomson Reuters, who are a global technology firm. You might know Reuters News. In their global corporate responsibility team for a role that they had newly launched. And a lot of my roles actually have been roles that didn't exist before. Okay. So it's that balance of sort of seeing where your experience leads and also what's on the job description. They needed somebody who had experience in the third sector, and they also wanted somebody who had experience in the private sector. And I had both.
But it's either the scariest thing or the best thing. It's that unknown, but then it gives you the space and the creativity to make it what you want, I imagine.
Absolutely. And it's totally worth the jump, because after sort of launching into Thomson Reuters, it was sort of my painting to paint.
Sure.
I had a role that covered diversity and inclusion, sustainability with regards to editor on our sustainability website, and also community investments, so running our voluntary programs in the UK, but also across the globe. So I got to see it from many different angles.
Yeah.
And then after Thomson Reuters, 4 years there, I wanted to do something tangible to really support businesses and still cut across all industries. And then this opportunity came up at Natural Capital Partners, which looked at just that, but focusing on the environment. And it was, again, a perfect fit, because a lot of what many, I'm sure, will agree when working, whether it's in diversity and inclusion or any of these employee networks, what you're doing is constantly selling something internally, but also externally. So there were natural transferable skills, which I apply to today when working with my clients. And that's the picture.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. There's lots of nuggets in there, which we're going to pick back up as we step through the questions today. So the next thing I'm really intrigued to understand is how has the reality sort of squared up alongside the expectation being in the industry you work in? Is it about right? Is it not where it needs to be? And then dependent upon what the answer is there, how does that make you feel? And what responsibility do you feel you have to try and get it to match your expectations? Let's go back to you, Charles, and then Colin, and come back to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Dom. So I think straight off the back, reality has met in terms of what I expected from the job. I think straight away, when you find that, so in my new role, for example, let's just use the example of the Caribbean. So in the Caribbean, over the past couple of months, there have been issues with the volcanoes and ash clouds, etc.
Yeah.
And literally, you could be reading something in a newspaper, and in 24 hours, you could be in that location. Okay. That is my reality. So I think for me, what I signed up for is what I'm seeing. And so when you think about the COVID response, or you think about different things, people may not know a lot of what we do. However, our men and women here and overseas are living that reality every day. So as I said to my squadron leader yesterday, she said, are you happy to be in this new role? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Because finally, because I obviously study international relations as well. I could open a book and talk about the United Nations. I can open a book and talk about history. I can open a book and talk about philosophy. I can open a book and talk about current operations around the world. However, when you're now catapulted into a situation where you're not reading anymore, Charles, you're in charge. Yeah. Your clock stops with you.
You're writing your book that someone else is going to read about, and it can either be a tragedy or you can be the hero.
Absolutely. So when you are should I say, thrown into that kind of environment, you finally realize, actually, I'm doing an absolutely brilliant job. So I think that's my perspective on it anyway.
Great. And same question to you.
Yeah, cheers, Dom. Again, Charles has actually put it very nicely, because when I think back of what I've already done in this past year, it's phenomenal. For instance, the Duke of Edinburgh passing away, it was my office that initiated the start of this operation. It's the amount of stuff that I get to see matches of my expectations and my reality and my wow. I get those wow moments when you actually realize you're actually dealing with current affairs.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what I wanted. And I think I've positioned myself nicely to see the things that we talk about or left on the fish and chips paper, as we used to say back in the day, being what I've seen or done or dealt with before most of you ladies and gents wake up. I've probably dealt with something you never would have heard of. And when you hear about it, it's just, oh, that happened 2 weeks ago. I'll be like, okay, I know when that happened. You see what I mean? So it's an interesting thing.
It sounds exciting. I'm not going to press you for information, but there's something there. There's interesting things happening, which sounds like you're in the world.
All the time.
And Shera, how about you? How have expectations matched up to reality?
Definitely exciting as well. Whether it's my time at Thomson Reuters or my time now working with my clients, for example, whether I see, I don't know if you're familiar with the men's cosmetic range, Bulldog, but whether I see a carbon neutral company logo on their products, or food chains such as Oaxaca or Neil's Yard, it's wow, I help them get there. And that's exactly what
I'm going to check out Bulldog, because I've just seen myself. And I will look it up.
They've got some great products. They're not paying me for that extra bit, no. But it's exactly that. I wanted to do something tangible that brings about tangible change. And then you have the projects that we support on the ground, some of which are in Ghana, so I can actually go and see them myself. It's so tangible, so it ticks that box.
So these are all sort of fascinating answers, because it's making me, really excited about what you do, and that's different to what my expectation was, sort of reading your bios. So do you feel your industry promotes your roles and positions in the best possible way? Could more be done to advertise it to a more diverse audience, so we get better take up from the Black community?
Yeah, I'll take that. No, absolutely. I think that since Charles and I joined, we've seen night and, so to speak, day and night, so to speak, with our organization. The change in the past 6 years has been different, phenomenal, great, but because we pushed, it's interesting, the people you meet and the voices and if you're in Eton, for example, the sort of the tales you pull to actually make a point to say, sir, mom, you need to be looking in this direction. Why aren't you guys in my community? Why aren't you guys talking about the skill sets and the things you can learn and places you can go in my community? We've got the best people in STEM, or STEAM as they call it now, science, technology, art, engineering, mathematics, in my community. Because ultimately everything comes down to, how are we preparing the next generation to be thought leaders, to be leaders in any field that they're in? And you're thrust into it, especially for Charles and I, where you have to lead men and women, you have to lead their careers, you have to actually make sure that they go away safe, come back safe. All those things are on your shoulders from a very young age. So why isn't that in our community? So seeing the change, our network, our Black network, started because in what, 2016, Charles, correct me if I'm incorrect, but 2016, and we've just seen leaps and bounds in the things we've done. And some of the photos I'm sure that you have for your audience will also express that point. Again, it's because we said we should be doing more, and we should be seen to be doing more, because it's going to employ our next generation. That is the point. We need to be part of the community.
So I'm really keen to get into that question as to what was the catalyst for you setting up your networks. But before I do, I'm just keen to understand whether any of you saw Black role models within the industry before you got into it? Or did you have to become a trailblazer, which is a word which is becoming, increasingly common? I think sometimes people just do what they need to do, and then they look at themselves as trailblazers retrospectively. How was it for you, Shara?
Yeah, I can answer that one because at the moment I'm the only Black person in my organization, and it goes even.
And sorry to cut you. Just give us some context for that in terms of the size, and then it would be also interesting to get a sense of when you go to events and maybe see people from other organizations. Is it consistent there?
Yeah, it is. Sustainability has a hashtag, sustainability so white, and it's one that I challenge, and I'm also in this organization because they also challenge.
Yeah.
So we're aligned on that vision in terms of what needs to be done and how we need to change it. Where I am now at Natural Capital Partners, we're early on in the journey, so we don't yet have a network. Coming from a fully established sort of Thomson Reuters with 10 different networks and managing it globally, it's interesting to see the nuances. But in terms of the industry as a whole, it's known to be white, which doesn't reflect the communities in which we support. And what's really sort of infuriates me is that whilst I didn't see Black role models, they very much exist. So for example, and I will probably get into this, so prompt me if I'm going into too much detail, but at Thomson Reuters, one of my roles was the editor of our sustainability thought leadership website. I made it my mission, and then soon I was coined, oh yeah, the Africa girl. But every single story I knew we had role models and we have leadership. There are people, to use the phrase, hidden gems that I would interview and bring to light. It even transcends to, I did a postgraduate course at Cambridge in this space. And again, I was probably 1 or 2 out of a class of 30 who were Black. And this industry is known for it, but you do have to become, I guess, that visible role model.
Sure. And there's a question here from Zara, and I have to say, Zara was clapping a point you made earlier, and she's keen for you to answer this particular question. Sure. Zara, can I call on you to ask the question yourself, please? This usually goes really well or really badly. Okay, so she's on the move, which is absolutely fine. I once had somebody on the bus who couldn't answer the question because they were literally sitting on the top deck. So the question we have here is, what's your advice, Shara, on discovering new roles that you didn't know existed before?
Definitely have conversations, and don't say no to things you think you might know about. When the recruitment, so I was headhunted for this role, and I first said to her, what are you saying? I've got no sales experience. What do you mean? But I thought, why not? So definitely, I think I've heard the phrase, have a month where you don't say no and just say yes to everything. Have to manage that, obviously, but have a time where you just say yes. And I think having those conversations, whether it's with people in your network, hey, I'm passionate about X, I don't know what that role looks like in reality, but the more you share what you're passionate about, the more people can help you connect those dots within their networks as well. Would definitely be my advice.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So let's talk about your networks now and the catalysts that led you to start them. If I think about my own network, it was quite simply a lack of representation. I was the most senior person in the business, and I was on my own at the sort of the top of the mountain, as it were, and we needed to create more leaders. So what about for yourselves? Let's start with you, Colin.
Yes, certainly. So and it links into the question you asked Shara last. It's a case of, did you have Black role models? Well, the answer to that is no. So I had to find them. So when I say I had to find them, it wasn't necessarily the case that I had them physically in my workspace, because I am in a mainly white organization. But still, going to the museum, as I mentioned at the start of this, I realized that actually there must have been Black people in this organization in the first place, because I suppose it's when you set the seed and you plant it, water it, and put the right sun in atmosphere, it should increase. So hold up, let me go and do some digging. So Charles and I did. And what we did was we created this called the Little Known Heroes of the Royal Air Force.
Amazing.
Now, what I said was, and what Charles and I said is, if we ever join this organization, this is what we said in the museum, I will create something like this. So what it does, it charts 100 years since our inception of people who are Black men and women who've been in the Air Force. And it was in collaboration with the Power List.
Fantastic.
And so, I'm just trying to show you bits and pieces of the camera, but it's quite important because, again, we go back to the First World War, Second World War. So in other words, these men and women, these brave men and women, that I never hear about when we talk about the fact of when we remember them, who are we remembering? Because men from Jamaica, women, people came from all over the world to support the war effort. So remembering those people was creating my role models to be able to role model further and help those coming through. And so that's the way I've done it, really.
I think that's such a powerful point on so many different levels. And when you combine it with the fact that Windrush generation now are coming to an age where, you know, unfortunately they're passing, if their stories aren't being documented and shared, we'll lose them. And actually, I don't know if you're in touch with the Black Cultural Archives. I know.
Certainly.
Okay, fantastic. So your project is connected with that organization.
Well, I'm connected to one or two of the people down there, so we're looking to do great things. Clearly, COVID was a big issue last year, but we're going to do something big. But watch this space, everybody.
I'm watching. We're here.
Watch it. It's going to be big. It's going to be great.
You've almost broken the chat here in the vein of like breaking the internet. You know, people want to know the name of the book, so please put it into the chat so people can work out where to find it and.
Certainly.
Appreciate it. And same question for you, Charles, or maybe it's along the same lines. Was there something unique to yourself in terms of what's motivated you in your network?
I think the word you used was trailblazer at the start. And I think it continues because, yes, indeed, Colin said it well, we were very much in a position where you do things, you have to get things done. You have to be proactive. You have to be able to say, is there an example? Okay, there's none, so let me be that example, right?
Yeah.
So I think Little Known Heroes was one of those steps. And I think going forward after that has been amazing because when in 2015 in September, we started off as a BAME network. We were part of the committee. Our Chief of Air Staff, so our 4-star, was in attendance to see the work start off and so on. But it was a realization that we needed to show that our service was a diverse service, because people often forget we're in operations around the world. Everyone doesn't look the same. So we need the SME knowledge to be able to speak to the people, boys and girls, or people, on the ground. Okay. And so communities have so many talents, so many skills, languages, you name it. Studied so many very, very intricate, very great things at university or just in the University of Life. And so that leadership goes right down to our corporals, our SACs, or senior aircraftsmen, as they're known. Literally, everyone is given an opportunity to lead. And so when you see that as a flight lieutenant or as both of us are ranks, we have no choice but to lead. You see? So to answer your question in a nutshell, for us, this was an opportunity to be able to show, indeed, that there were people from 1918, when our organization started, who were part of this journey. And it's always easy to say, oh, that was a long time ago. No, but we remember them too.
That's right.
And I think this is a great way of showing that to the future, because most times young people are very much, oh, I don't want to join the military. And I'm being very open about this. But if they knew there was a progression, there were people before them who took those steps, they too will want to take those steps themselves. So it's a way of alleviating that kind of, you're over there and we're over here kind of scenario.
Yeah, I think that's such a fantastic point. And it reminds me of something I say all the time, which is for young people coming through, what they have is not just an opportunity, it's a responsibility. It's the responsibility to build on what's come before, because if we don't and it ceases to be, then everything people have invested over decades and centuries will then be squandered. So, that really comes through in what you're saying. And Shera, same question for you. I'm keen to understand what has been the catalyst for your network.
Definitely the response of sort of, oh, you're the only Black person in this space. Oh, we're so glad to have you on board. That answer infuriates me.
Yeah. Got one. Yeah, tick.
No. And my response is always, whether it was when I was being asked in terms of at Cambridge with like Black professors, I provided them a full list of professors. So it's us having sort of a solutions mindset.
Yes.
And that's what has sort of catapulted or been that catalyst. For example, when I first joined the Black Employee Network, we didn't have a executive sponsor. So I was like, well, this needs to be done and this needs to be sorted. So I went to the sort of ex-co sort of CEO -1 and started from there. And the number of yeses and responses I got, everybody was surprised. But I think it's having a solutions mindset to really do the work to see what works for the organization. What do we need? We needed somebody in a higher level in the organization who wasn't Black, but they can help influence.
Okay, so I just want to go back to this point because there's clearly a wealth of information there. If I just reverse it back, you've walked into the CEO -1's office and you've pitched this person, you've closed them, and they're now involved in your network. So one of the things we're always really keen to do in this session is to talk nuts and bolts, real practical points. So for someone who's listening, we might have someone who is relatively new to this. They would love to get their CEO on side, but they have no idea how to approach that conversation. So can you break down some of the key tactics you use?
Absolutely. There's no secret to it. It's hard work. It's research. It's knowing, sort of mapping out that what is this person passionate about? He at the time was also a member of the LGBT community. So there was sort of, there was an intersectionality piece on what we needed. He was also very passionate about multiculturalism, and I knew that about him. To other organizations I've worked at, I have connected on a personal level. So a CFO, for example, was Irish. There's a shared sort of UK Black and Irish experience. So he was one of the people, and it's just having those frank personal conversations, but also being mindful to, I guess the word is empathy for some leaders. They might want to support, they might be passionate about it, but there are restraints that you might not be conscious of. So it's going in there, having this is what we would like you to do. This is what it looks like. This is your commitment. It is once a quarter, we would like for you to share X with the CEO, or in a leadership meeting, we would like for you to suggest 2 other senior leaders we can approach, or we would like for you to provide a senior member we can approach to speak in an event. So it's very tangible. It's very clear on what you're asking in terms of time commitment, what you're asking in terms of budget, because that's often where it also falls down. Because you go and you're like, well, we want to do something. Okay, what do you want? What do you need? And then it's, well, we'll come back to you. And by that time,
after you, it dissipates. So it sounds like you've got to build a business case and present it,
absolutely,
and show its value. And do you feel that any senior person can be, for want of a better word, closed, or do you feel you've got to pick your battles or pick your individual?
Yeah, you've definitely got to do that research to pick the individual. Sometimes I'm strategic and I pick sort of individuals I know are most skeptical about whether it was Black Lives Matter and saying something internally or doing something internally, I would approach those individuals to understand what their challenges were, whether it was, oh, you know, we have a couple investors who don't want us to go down this route. So then you go back to the drawing board and look at what the solution could be to meet people where they are. And I think that's the most important takeaway. It is understandable and quite fair sometimes for us to get frustrated, but we have to meet people where they are. There is always a breaking point for every single person. And in doing the research, for example, just another quick nuts and bolts,
please.
Joining our sustainability editorial team, there weren't many stories on leadership in terms of Black leaders or women leaders. It was mostly, you know, if it was female, then it was white female. So I made it my mission to make sure that we interviewed, and I did all the hard work in interviewing, whether it was Gina Miller after she won her number one power list.
Her book is fascinating when you really sort of go through her story. I mean, she was living on her own with her sister without parents in another country, which is just mind-blowing.
And also her daughter and the challenges of raising someone who's differently abled, and just phenomenal. She's one out of 20 plus other leaders across the globe who I was able to feature on our sustainability website to share that platform with, whether it's the Vice President of Iran or Mary Robinson, who's the first female president of Ireland. We exist. So it's just doing that work to make sure we highlight our hidden gems.
Fantastic. So let's ask another question now to you, Colin and Charles. I'm keen to understand how your networks are adding value to retaining Black talent in the RAF and attracting Black talent. And I'm keen to get into some of the nuts and bolts now of how it's benefiting things.
Yeah, sure. So, for instance, it's things like what I've just mentioned, like the Little Known Heroes of the Royal Air Force. The aim ultimately will be to get it out there, not only to AFCOs, but to get it into schools. Now, Charles and I in particular tend to go into schools when we're invited to just talk to the kids. Just, hey, how are you? You know, meet them at their level. What we've noticed is a lot of kids in primary school are actually quite eager to learn because they love sports. And we say, well, you're a team player. That's what we want. Oh, you're good at science. That's what we want. So we start at the young age. But what we're not trying to indoctrinate them to join a cult. What we're doing is telling them that they have many abilities that will be needed soon for the betterment of themselves, but not only that, the community. I always drive about the community, and one of the photos that we sent to you to share with your audience was when we were opportune to go to number 10. But this
let's try and see that photo if we can. So right on cue, hopefully our audience members can see this photo. This is incredibly powerful. It looks like there's Lord Simon Woolley there.
Yes, indeed. So just to talk while that photo is on there, Charles and I were talking at the US Embassy, and for some random reason we were talking to so many different people, and a gentleman placed a card in my brother's hand and ran away somewhere. And later on we found that it was the Prime Minister's basic community czar. And we got talking, and he was like, listen, how do we help the community? Because that's his role, and how do we bridge gaps? So obviously, typical me, I went in there with a grump, and I said, well, excuse me, I just thought the Prime Minister had an event where she got a lot of the Black leaders trying to deal with the knife crime epidemic a few years ago. Where was the military? I saw his head go down like, oh yeah, wow, why didn't we do that?
I like that. Oh yeah, and billions of pounds on.
Yeah, so he was just like, for goodness sake, why didn't we think about that? So he said, listen, we've got to do something. So we said, look, okay, Easter's coming close, but what we need to do is, let's do something. He's like, yeah, let's do something with the RAF. Charles and I sat back and said, no, actually, let's make this bigger. We'll make it a tri-service thing, and we'll also invite one of our colleagues or in the US Embassy, etc., etc. It's like, wow, let's make this a thing. So typical Black crowd, we went to number 10, making a lot of noise. People are thinking, what's going on here? Who are all these Black people with different cap badges and different donations? Well, we sat in this room, a very big, grand room, and we were talking to the issues. And we said, we need to know and we need to do more. Who knew a few years later that a lot of people would rely on the services during this COVID response, who would rely on the NHS. And there we were talking about things of how do we connect with the NHS? How do we connect with other sectors and actually get to know each other, for goodness sake, know each other. We need to know ourselves, because once we know ourselves, we can better the community. Everything from me and everything I utter is always about how does it benefit my community?
Yes.
Because a lot of people have put a lot of funds and money behind their stuff. And talking to what Cheryl was saying, again, when it comes down to what do you want, most people don't have a clue. I want funds and I want it now. And what I do with those funds is up to me, right? Because I can get those people going into those schools. I can get those people wanting to, our guys talking to the boys and girls and encouraging them to take a different path. Yes, I'm passionate about it, and that's why I've taken this tone, but it's so important.
I think that's brilliant. And I often find myself talking like how you are talking when someone asks me a simple question. And I think you've got to have that level of drive and passion, because there's so many barriers out there. If you haven't got that enthusiasm and that sort of, if you're not that force of nature to sort of blow those barriers down and push on and create opportunities and galvanize people, then it just doesn't happen. So, you know, please never apologize for that. That's exactly what we're about today and what we want to see resonating.
I suppose that was a full apology. I wasn't really apologizing.
You're going to turn it up even more. You know, it's brilliant. It's really insightful. And same question to you as well, Charles. Is there anything you want to add to that in terms of how networks are adding value in your environment?
I think from my experience, from our vision, myself and Colin's vision, is we don't work in silos. So I'm very much into the thing of mixing. Obviously, we are a government organization, but we want to know how the commercial side do things.
Yeah.
So some of the work we've done, obviously with the Power List and some others, is to really reach into our community. We find that it's all well and good to speak from our high horse. Oh, we're speaking from number 10, we're speaking from the US Embassy, we're speaking from, what do the people on the ground know about us?
Yeah.
Actually, so it all is a waste of time if the youngest person you ask, oh, so who's that person? And they think you're probably working in another, maybe nothing wrong with any of the supermarkets, or they think you are a chauffeur or something, but they don't realize you hold the Queen's Commission. And holding the Queen's Commission is a big deal, obviously. We take it lightly ourselves. But that is the ability to lead our men and women, regardless of whatever situation or operation we're in. We are the box stops of us. So we lead our lives making sure, yes, we're disciplined. However, we do laugh. We do have a joke. We eat plantain. We eat rice. We enjoy ourselves in our community. But if our community doesn't know that, how do we translate that? So for us, it's that thing about the future. And when you think about space, for example, we're now an air and space force. Most people don't know that, but we're looking to space. And then if you think we're looking, communities know about space. If they don't know about space, we're in trouble again. Yeah. So it's a case of arming our young boys and girls with the skill sets and understanding that, hey, engineering, the law of space is still a new industry.
Yeah.
Do that in the Air Force. Why not?
Absolutely. Fully agree. And going back to you, Cheryl, I know you've got an image to share, and I'm keen to hear the story behind your image.
Thanks, Dom. So I also needed to show and tell, didn't I? But this was just speaking to, I shared earlier, the feature and some of the work I did on our Thomson Reuters site, from sort of the top left, looking at interviewing people such as Tuli Madonsela, who helped write the South African Constitution with Nelson Mandela. Like, these are phenomenal leaders across our communities. Okay, you've got some D-list celebrities like Akon, but all the CEO of the Nigerian Securities Exchange, FMDQ, it was, and then obviously Gina Miller.
Sure.
It was all about, I was tasked with leading this feature. And, you know, your usual suspects, your Sherry Blairs, your Mary Robinsons, but I had to go sort of the not extra mile, but I had to be really mindful and intentional about making sure wherever there was a new opportunity, whether it was a networking opportunity and I met some of these leaders, that I approached them, did the hard work to get them featured. Another way in which, so you can take that away now. Another way in which networks have shown up is also for us to remember there is so much power in our network that extends our organization. Our networks are business resource groups.
Yeah.
So the tangibles and outputs that come out of it are to impact the business bottom line. And so one of the things that I remember doing was organizing an event with Accenture, who was one of our largest clients. And in the end, it was sort of 5 events across the globe, which I co-led with a network leader in Accenture. The business listened, and the business listened very, very intently, because now you're working with your key clients. There is clear benefit to the business, which aligns on a profitable perspective because you're enhancing that client relationship. It aligns on a shared value experience. So there's real sort of, when people think, oh, what are we going to do internally? Maybe don't worry about the internals. If you've got a connection with another network leader in a different organization, connect that dot and bring it back to the business. I guarantee you they will listen then.
Yeah, I think that's a really subtle but important piece of advice, and it's certainly something I feel like I've benefited from. It might be the right word, but you introduce that sort of positive disturbance into your business. It's a new way of thinking, it's a new language, and then you're multiplying each other through initiatives or projects they are doing and inspiring each other with what you may be doing.
And it goes back to the point that we're not the only ones. Our community is strong and our community is doing great work. If we can't sort of elevate each other, we're going to be having the same conversation in a year, 5 years from now. We need to be sort of breaking the mold and sort of challenging the status quo, because we exist.
Yeah, I fully agree. We are not at our best in a silo. I'm really conscious of time because there's so many nuggets of information flowing now, and there's a question here from Deirdre. And if you're able to, Deirdre, I'd love you to ask your question yourself. Can you do that, please? If not, then I will ask Deirdre's question. No? Okay. I'm not having much luck with the audience participation this week. So the question I've got here is any nuggets for passing on all of these options, I'm assuming sort of career options, to mentees or young students. And then it also says networks or other resources I can guide them to. So Deirdre, if you're still there, please jump in. No? Okay. So who would like to pick that one up? I suppose the essence of this question is about passing on the knowledge to young people. Are there any resources in particular that you can guide them to, or maybe even add it to the chat?
So passing on resources to young people?
Yes, please.
If Colin and Charles have one to mind, I'm going to think that.
Well, maybe, sorry, after you.
Sure. I think from our experience, I think the RF Museum is a great start for young people. I think how we started was just a case of we just went somewhere. The RF Museum, from our perspective, does that. Yeah. Also, young people are so smart these days. They have so many of the social media platforms to use to be able to get information much faster than we would in our own generation. I can speak for myself, obviously. However, it's a case of reading a lot. I think so from the RF Museum to going online and seeing some of the things, work that we do, math, science, as Colin said, STEAM, STEM, etc. It's a big deal now.
Yeah.
And I think TV, when you see people who are doing really great things, astronauts or Formula One drivers and so on, that's all engineering. If we're able to break it down to young people and say, you're seeing this every single day in your life because your iPad, your phones, your TVs have all this technology inside of them. Here's a stepping stone. So for me, I think obviously from a service perspective, it's the RF Museum, but online has so many interesting resources, BBC, educational sites, etc.
Yeah.
These are some of the things we would use when we were young.
I think that's great advice. And if I were to sum it up, it's about bringing their education to life. And it's not just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It's giving it relevance. And funnily enough, my son had a careers day today and they had to run a business, and it just drew upon so many different skills. And it was like, I get it now. You know, this is how I use my maths, and this is, you know, how I use logic and reasoning. So I fully agree with you. Unfortunately,
just a very quick plug there for Urban Synergy. If your child is based, or just children are based in South London, it's a phenomenal charity that offers a mentorship program, and it opens pupils up to so many careers and so many role models. So I'd just plug that there. Might be helpful.
Brilliant. Jordan, if you're able to, please just type that into the chat for anybody who's interested. Unfortunately, we have to bring today's session to a close. And I would just like to give each of you the opportunity to leave us with one final piece of knowledge or wisdom on anything you feel is relevant and indicative of what you really want to communicate today. Why don't you start first, Shara, and then we'll go around to Colin, then Charles.
Why, thank you. So for me, the message is definitely tap into the resources you do have, forget about what you don't, and just really look within and have a solutions mindset.
Thank you.
I would say everything that you have to do is look into the community, work with each other, talk. This is a time more than ever to talk to each other. And let's think about the next boys and girls, and let's make them greater than we are. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Charles, over to you.
And I think for me, thank you, Dom. I think for me, based on the theme of this program, it's a case of leadership. I for the past couple of days, I've been running a particular line in my head, and I think I probably would just share it with all of you.
Please.
It's a little bit of a dit or parable, and it says someone needed a job to be done, but then someone sat back and looked at something and said, "Who should I send? Send me." So when it comes down to it, as leaders, you know, even though it's hard, you have a team around you, but leadership sometimes is a very lonely place. But you have to be able to say, send me. Really, all that means is you're ready to do whatever it takes to make something a reality. So I think for me, I've actually pondered and reflected on that. And for me, the headline point is, who shall I send? Send me.
That's brilliant. I actually don't want to say anything else now. I feel like I'm going to take the shine of all of those wonderful summaries. The only thing I will say is I've really enjoyed today, and it's been absolutely jam-packed with useful information. And I really appreciate it when guests come on and sort of open up and be transparent about their journeys and things that have worked and things that maybe haven't worked so well. You know, it really educates our listeners. And please, you know, go on demand, go back through today's session and share it with your networks so that we can build our community and create the positive change we would all like. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.